Over at Marvel Comics, the publisher has done a fantastic job expanding their X-Men line of titles over the past couple years, thanks to the status quo of Krakoa crafting a home for Marvel's mutants. One such mutant who has fascinating ties to several X-Men characters and even some British heroes is none other than Betsy Braddock. We've seen Betsy really fight for her own in the pages of Excalibur and Knights of X, but now Betsy is getting the time to shine over in a solo series, fleshing out her side of the Marvel Universe in even more detail. My name is Erick Braddock, and today let's go ahead and dive into the pages of Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain #1, to see all of the new kind of status quos and revelations that Betsy is bringing along with her. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button if you enjoy our content. Next up, I want to provide some context behind Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain #1, with Marvel's solicitation text for the issue. The captain comes home, and she's got a whole new mission. With Otherworld settled, Braddock Manor restored, and her brother Captain Avalon at her side, you'd think things look pretty good for Betsy Braddock. Only it turns out good old Britain doesn't want her back. No one wants a mutant menace carrying the shield of Captain Britain, and Betsy's made more than a few enemies along her way. Questless and countryless, Betsy must define a role for herself. A fresh take on a beloved character. Don't miss the latest Tini Howard extravaganza and fan favorite artist Vasco Georgiev's Marvel debut. And now I want to read the creative team behind this series. This one is written by Tini Howard, illustrated by Vasco Georgiev. We have colors over from Erick Arciniega, letters from VC's Ariana Maher, and we have some design over from Tom Muller and Jay Bowen. I also want to show off the really gorgeous cover over for the first issue from Erica D'Urso and Matthew Wilson. Here's a look at the gorgeous cover over for Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain #1. I want to give a big thanks to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting their preview of this issue so incredibly fast. And I want to explain a little bit sort of about this new status quo for Betsy, and I want to introduce kind of some of the things that she's currently dealing with. Over in the kind of opening of the issue, we see Betsy directly sort of addressing the news, because one of the things that Tini Howard, the author of the series, has really focused on in the issue is Betsy's public image. A lot of people are not very fond of the new Captain Britain ever since Betsy took the role over from her brother, and it's caused a little bit of friction over in the Marvel Universe. You know, due to her tenure with the X-Men and with previous series, Betsy has more than sort of like established herself in the role, but in the face of the public, people are much less trusting of Betsy, which is just sort of an interesting plot point that Tini Howard addresses throughout the book to make it sort of like a core aspect of the series and something that directly sort of pays into the cliffhanger as well. So from a narrative standpoint, I really like some of the things that Howard is establishing over in this first issue. I also think the art from Vasco Georgiev is really nimble and expressive throughout this issue. The character of Britannica Rex was sort of a great moment that looks so gorgeous. I think Georgiev depicted this dinosaur Captain Britaincorps member with such incredible precision that it was just so great to kind of see this character throughout the issue. And it was impressive to see some of the visuals that Georgiev was really able to execute throughout this series. They were quite ambitious as well. Take a look at how kind of this page is structured with all of these sort of curved lines. The one sort of negative I would say about Georgiev's art as a whole is there are some scenes where I noticed that the anatomy isn't quite precise. I really like the fact that Georgiev draws like such expressive figures, but I did notice that in certain moments where like characters were in like background panels, it did get a little bit more noticeable that, Georgiev may have like ran out of time. But overall, for the vast majority of the pages in this issue, I think the artwork from Georgiev is just gorgeous to behold. I love sort of like the different ways he kind of shakes up the panel composition and really manages to find interesting ways to pose all of the different characters throughout the series. So the issue never seems sort of static over from a visual standpoint. I was really struck by sort of how deep Tini Howard dove into the Betsy Braddock property. Whenever I get a Marvel comic focused on a solo character, I'm looking at the character, I'm looking to see if the character is able to sort of establish some of the relationships they've iterated on from previous series in ways that seem sort of holistic and make sense. And I love the fact that we see Betsy, communicating with her family, with Rachel. There's just so many great moments throughout this story where Betsy is sort of checking in on her loved ones, and Tini Howard is making sure to give established characters kind of new scenarios to interact with, and also just give them sort of new ways to tie back to the story to enhance what Betsy Braddock is going through currently. Also, I think this issue is paced incredibly well. It's a very long issue, but there's so many different scenes that unfold. And by the time you get to kind of the final pages of the issue, you should have a great idea of where some of the themes in the issue are going. I think in past issues, I've had a little bit of an issue following Tini Howard's plot, but I think thanks to kind of skimming down on some of the characters in this series, it's a little bit easier to follow this book in particular and see where kind of Betsy is headed. There are so many sort of plot details that are still here from previous series like Excalibur and Knights of X, including, Lady Saturnine and Otherworld and how those characters interact with each other. But I don't think those elements bog the story down too much. Also, I was really curious to see how did this sort of plot thread with the Furies begins to develop, and thinks it brings out so many sort of interesting parts of Marvel lore. I love how this issue referenced, past issues of Captain Britain on the info pages for the title. It made the series really kind of show their work and inform that if you go back and read previous issues of Captain Britain, you're going to get a lot more context for this series. Also, I love that we're still getting the emphasis on characters like Petewisdom. I think it's great to see Pete still being a part of Betsy's life along with the other characters and operating the mysterious strike as well. And also, I really like the domestic scenes between Betsy and Rachel. I thought that Tini Howard spent a considerable amount of time, fleshing out their relationship, because we never quite got the chance to see this couple really establish themselves over in the pages of Knights of X. And I really enjoy the way that Tini Howard kind of balances out the physical relationship between Rachel and Betsy versus the telekinetic aspect of their relationship. And the fact that it's depicted with so much honesty really sort of made me empathize with both characters and drove me kind of deeper and deeper into the narrative. Again, I think sort of the way that the public is interacting with Betsy throughout this tale is tied into the plot in such a unique way, and actually leads directly into the cliffhanger. I think from a narrative standpoint, this issue is structured incredibly well. And when the time comes for, crazy action sequences to break out into the issue, I think that Georgiev is really able to kind of nail some of the precision and accuracy needed to make these scenes look really dynamic. I think the last couple pages of Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain really show what the series is capable of in terms of the writing from Howard as well as the artwork from Georgiev. I think we kind of see the true scope of the series and get a really interesting kind of fantasy backdrop set against this fascinating British X-Men tale. So those were some of my thoughts over on Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain #1. I thought this was a great way to continue Marvel's emphasis that they've placed on Betsy Braddock's character throughout Krakoa. I really enjoyed this sort of streamlined tale that, had less characters than previous series, but was still able to get, really unique interactions between the characters throughout this issue. I really enjoyed the cliffhanger and how Tini Howard was able to use the thematic elements established from the first pages to inform the ending as well. So I want to know from you, what were some of your thoughts over on Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain #1? What do you think of the way that Marvel has sort of inverted this continuity and kept, such care over on these Captain Britain characters? Well, thank you guys so much for coming to check out the video. We'll be back really soon with more excellent comic book content. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.